Hey everybody, welcome back to Guys Night Lab. I'm Jesus Velasquez.
And I'm Jordan Zacharias.
And I hope you're having a fun Halloween time, and welcome back to Guys Night Lab Halloween Nights. And today we are going to review a movie. It's a little movie called CandyMan. Because the Candyman can.
What year was this one?
1992.
92, that's
yes.
right.
So Candyman is actually, it's a story written by Clive Barker, if you believe it or not.
I forget that.
And I think it's like I don't know if it's a short story or an actual book. I think it's called The Forbidden.
Okay.
But the movie Candyman came out, and it stars Tony Todd. If you don't know who that is, you'd recognize him. It was directed by Bernard Rose. And pretty much, if you haven't seen this movie, it is different. Okay. I do have to say, because we watched it last week.
Right.
And it's creepy.
That was the first time I'd seen it in a while. Yeah.
And I mean, if you know anything about me and my story of horror movies, I started really young. And so, yeah, this is no exception. I watched this movie when I was probably like 8 or 9.
Still in diapers.
Yeah, still in diapers. And then I was like, Mama, what's on? She's like, go watch Candyman. No. But I remember, Jordan, you mentioned it when we were watching it. You said that you're like, oh, because you hadn't seen it. And you're like, well, it's different. I don't know if you're going to like it. And what did I say? You said
you said you thought that I would not like it because you're like, it's a little bit more of like an African American centric film, but it has like a weird vibe to it and stuff. And I was like, okay. So I kind of went into it not knowing what to expect because I really didn't know what to expect. And then I loved it. I loved it the first time I watched it.
And I didn't mean it like you're white, like you're not gonna get it. I just felt like there's like different like.
You were trying to say there's cultural things in there where you're like, I don't know if you'll get all the references or you'll understand all of it. And it is a weird story, but I really like the story.
Oh, for sure. It is one of those movies that's like, it's really creepy and it's like psychological and...
It's a very twisted fairy tale is what it feels like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just like the urban legend, you know, because if you think about it, like it's a take on like Bloody Mary in a sense,
right.
You know. But, you know, if we're talking about like, you know, cultural and diversity and stuff like that, it's its own take. But it is an excellent movie that builds like atmosphere and just the idea of, because, okay, if you haven't heard the story or haven't seen the movie of Candyman, it revolves around this grad student and she's doing this topic on like this, I guess, urban legend Candyman. But most of her of the movie or most of her projects, she has to go to the projects or the ghetto or whatever.
Right.
And so there's this underlying...
It's like in Chicago or something.
Yeah,
right?
It's in Chicago. And so it's in like the really like ghetto, very torn down, poor, of Chicago. And so there's this kind of like underlying idea of like fear. So there's that fear of like Candyman, which is like the supernatural killer with like a hook for a hand. But then there's like the surfacey real life underlying fear of like you're in the ghetto and you're like a white woman and you know it's kind of like you're out of place, you're not somewhere where
she's a fish out of water.
You're not where you should be. And there is a scene in the movie where she does get beat up for being at the wrong place at the wrong time,
right?
But I feel like this movie does an excellent job of building that like fear, like especially if you haven't
poor Helen.
Yeah, poor Helen. Like if you haven't been in like the ghetto or around that, I mean there is some creepy aspects to it.
Right.
But then like the creepy aspects of Candyman in itself is even creepier. And then the psychological, because it's not just like a scary movie in the sense of like, oh, like Jason Myers. That's just like Michael Myers, he's a shape and he's a figure and he's there and he's unstoppable.
It's a nightmare. It's a living nightmare.
Yeah, like Candyman technically doesn't exist, but he does. And then it's like, but so that's where that psychological part comes in. It's like, what's going on? Like she's crazy. Yeah. So then it's like these ideas where they think she's killing everybody.
Right.
Because when every time a dead body pops out, there's no one to be around.
Yeah, they're like, white woman did it.
Yeah, well, the white woman did it, of course. And so, but yeah, no, Candyman is excellent movie. It's, what do you think, Jordan?
Okay, so the one thing I picked up on this year when we were watching it, I don't know if I shared it with you, but the funniest thing that I didn't think I would kind of have a parallel with, or another story that I found that it had a parallel with that I didn't think about the first time I watched it, is actually The Shining.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that in The Shining, you're kind of watching Jack's slow torture and, pulling from this hotel that's haunted. You know what I mean? So this place is alive and it's evil and it's calling to him and all these, ghosts are appearing to him and stuff like that. And slowly you're watching Jack Nicholson go crazy for 2.5 hours, which is why people love that movie, because it's like, how could you not love that?
Yeah.
It's slow at times, but people love it, and it's one of my favorite movies of all time. I think I really like Candyman because it's almost like Helen is Jack in the story, and she's going into the Overlook, which is the projects in that building.
Yeah.
And Candyman is kind of the spirits that are haunting her and kind of tormenting her. So for some reason that made me think of Shining. It's a completely different story, but it was interesting because it has that same kind of fantasy fairy tale like demented, weird. You don't really know what's reality and what's not. It has a lot of weird cuts and edits and stuff like that where you're like, okay, what's happening now?
Yeah.
So, but I really like the vibe of it overall though, because like you said, it has great pacing. It's not overly gory. Like it could have been really bad. It's not overly gory. So when you do see gore and violence, it's very effective and shocking. But yeah, just poor Helen, the whole story. she just gets the crap kicked out of her the whole time. I'm not going to spoil the ending. If you've never seen Candyman, do yourself a favor and go and see it. Definitely before you watch the remake or anything else. I haven't seen the remake, but I've heard it's not great. So.
Yes. So first and foremost, definitely check out Candyman. A few disclaimers. If you are 9 years old, don't watch it. I did that already for you. Don't do it. Don't put yourself.
It's an intense movie.
There is some gore. Absolutely. It's not over the top gore as it could be, but there is some gore. Just some disturbing images and stuff.
Yeah.
There's a
it's
scene.
not a movie for the faint of heart.
No. Like there's a scene where a kid is telling a story about another kid, and you don't know if the story is actually true.
Geez, that part.
Yeah, because the kid's telling the story, and the kid's telling his version of what he's heard. So you don't know if the story's true or not. But even though they show a little bit of the flashback of the story, and
it involves
just,
a child being mutilated.
Yeah, it involves like a child, and he's I'm just saying, as a kid, that messed me up. So
yeah,
just be aware. Anyways, the remake. I saw the remake. I think it came out this year, or it was probably supposed to be released last year. So I can't remember if it came out this year or last year, but it just does not hold up. And the thing is, I say this with regard with any movie, scary movie, but scary movies have a special place in my heart. When you try to make a movie, make a movie.
Right.
Make a movie about the fear and the scariness and stuff like that. What happened with the new Candyman is they replaced the psychological, mythical idea of Candyman and replaced it with political propaganda in the sense of, cops
there's some messages in
there.
Yeah,
like gentrification, cops are bad, almost white people are bad. And I mean, to an extent, you could say, yes, absolutely. There are some cops that are bad. There are some white people that are bad. There are some Mexican people that are bad. There are some black people that are bad. A lot of people are good and bad. It's just when you circle one certain demographic that is good or bad, and then you try to make a scary movie about that, you're going to single out a demographic. And I mean, I saw it right off the bat, and I picked it up 20 minutes into the movie, like, oh man, I was like,
I get bummed that they feel like they have to pick teams in movies now.
Yeah.
And it's like, a movie's supposed to be an escape.
And the thing was, the first 20 minutes of the remake of Candyman, like I thought they did an excellent job.
It was actually good.
Setting the atmosphere. I'm like, oh, okay, this is cool.
Yeah.
And then after the first 2 kills, 3 kills, and then I just started to notice a pattern of who was getting killed and why they were getting killed. And it just was very, like I said, the mythology, the urban legend, the psychological aspect of it was lost to kind of pamper and promote a certain idea, which isn't going to reach everyone. Was
it more anti-bully? Was it anti?
No, it wasn't anti-bully. It was just anti. I guess you could say gentrification or whatever. So, which is fine in a sense, but that's not worth murder,
Right.
And the psychologicalness of Candyman. Well, here's a spoiler. Well, I'll spoil it because I don't even think you should watch it. It's not worth watching. Watch the original. So, at the end of the remake of Candyman, a guy is kind of transforming into the new Candyman, and it's kind of like, why is he transforming?
Yeah.
They kind of try to explain it, but it's it's like, okay. So then he's transforming into Candyman. All these other people have died. He's laying in a church, and he cut off his hand so he could put a hook in it to become the new Candyman or whatever.
Okay.
So then he's laying in the church, and someone called the cops for help. So then the cops show up, and then the guy's on the floor of the church, and he's bleeding out because he cut off his hand, and so the cops shoot him, which is like,
He's got a gun. It's literally what we'd make jokes
yeah,
about.
it's like he's got a gun, and it was just like, what, like, okay, like really, like they shot him, like, and it was just like, okay, so they killed him. So then the girlfriend, she's there, and they arrest her. I'm like, this makes no sense. Like, what is going on? So then they arrest her. They put her in the cop car and tell her, like, oh, we're going to plant evidence and this and that. And the cops are just, like, evil.
Right.
Like, horrible, bad people. All the cops are white, of course. And then, so then the girl says Candyman in the rearview mirror of the cop's car 5 times. And then Candyman shows up and kills all the white cops. So then I was just like, what? Like, and then he just shows up and he says at the end of the movie, like, say my name, which is kind of a play on words for a lot of the situations that happened a few years ago with
BLM stuff.
Black Lives Matter, of like, you know, say their name and stuff like that people got.
Gotcha.
And so I get it. There's a movement. There's something that happened. Yes, there's certain things that happen politically that were unjust or whatever. But when you put it in the movie, especially, and you tag it with the Candyman movie, it's not going to sit well because it's not going to be for everybody. You're targeting a specific audience. And so the idea is like when you say, okay, well, Candyman is a quote unquote black movie. So when I explained it to you, I said like, well, I don't know if you're going to get it because it's got more black themes and there's culturally stuff that you might not understand. But you're not black and you loved it. You're like, this is great.
Yeah, really well done movie.
Watching the remake, you're gonna feel singled out. And so when I saw them, I'm like, I'm not white, I'm not black, but I just was like, I don't like this, like, because I already know what you're doing. And so like Hispanic, Mexican wise, I was on the sidelines on this. It had nothing to do with me. They didn't, but it was just like, but I know that once you pick sides in any movie, it's just not going to be good.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think what bothers me, I don't know if this bothers you too, but it's like if I'm gonna go see a movie about like a story that takes place on the border or something, I'm like, okay, well, this is obviously going to involve racial tension and things like that. But it's like if you're going to see a horror movie about a fictional guy named Candyman or like a Friday the 13th or whatever, it's like that's exactly the type of movie you watch to escape from reality and the 24-hour news cycle and everything else, where it just gets depressing and it just gets anxiety ridden and everything because everything is so screwed up everywhere. And that's all that they feed you because that's what gets clicks. That's clickbait. So I think, I don't know. Yeah.
So like there's an urban legend of like, it's called La Llorona. And we talked about it last year in our urban legends podcast or episode. And so the thing is, if there was a movie and it was like La Llorona and it's an urban legend, and it's a really good urban legend. It's really creepy. It's a, Hispanic, Mexican folklore.
Yeah, it's a creepy one.
It's a creepy one. And if they made a movie about it and then it turned into this like total like, political thing about illegal immigration and
she goes after toxic masculinity,
or like dreamers, and then they start using like Latinx or whatever that word is that nobody uses.
Is it Latinx? Or
I don't know.
I have no idea.
But anyways, if that's what that movie turned into, I will tell you that movie I would hate it. It's like, oh, but we made this movie for you. No, you didn't. You made it for a specific audience. That might not even care about horror movies. I want a horror movie. Like I would want a movie about a scary urban legend creepy lady that scares people and kills people. Like that's the fear. Like I don't want to think about politics. If you want to throw something in there where a Trump-like character accidentally gets murdered by her, cool, like whatever.
Totally.
That's just one funny scene, scene. But like if you're making the whole movie about it, it's just you lose yourself. The whole point of scary movies is for us to have that fear, the idea of like, oh, this and that. Real life fear, there's too much of that. We don't need any of that right now. We just want to escape.
And not to get too political or anything like that, but I think that's the problem with like woke comedy. Like if comedy's woke, they're if they're too afraid to talk about anything, chances are the material's not going to be that great or that funny because it's not going to challenge people to get uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that's something, the kind of same thing with movies, where it's like, dude, just give me a good scary movie with a good story. That's all I care about. And you got my money. If you have messages squozen in there to where it's a bad story and ruins the plot and everything else, then why did you make this movie?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just tweet. Like just send out a tweet with your feelings and your political agenda, and that's fine.
And I think that's where I said, I was like, yeah. So I was like, yeah, let's watch this one because I was like, there's a little bit of it's not even propaganda, but political statements, references of gentrification and the projects in the ghetto.
And it takes away from the story.
No, in the original.
Oh, in the
Candyman.
original.
I said
sorry,
so.
yeah.
I said what makes the original so great is that there is topics on political differences in cultural
Right.
gentrification and the projects and the white woman going and kind of like she's fearful, but it's like the people that live there. It's like, hey, this is our life.
You have sympathy for her and the people who
Yeah,
live
exactly.
there. You
Like,
have sympathy for everybody in the
Exactly.
story.
Like
Yeah.
they built it was like, hey, this is our culture, and this mythical psychological person is our boogeyman, but this boogeyman is a representation of our ghetto and our projects.
Right.
But the idea is, it still revolves around the boogeyman. With the overlaying of what the political statement was, and that was it. And then you just enjoy the scary movie.
And like you said, it built tension very well, very slowly. Like I said, when the parts get graphic and there is violence, it is graphic and
Yeah.
it is shocking, and it's very traumatic, and it feels almost like I don't know what you would compare it to, but it has that same kind of psychological growing feeling of dread, and then things are getting worse, and they're spiraling, and they're spiraling, and they're spiraling until the ending. And again, they do so well because then you think it's over, and then something else happens.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And it's just the way it was written and paced, I think, is perfect, and great editing too.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, anyways, check out Candyman. I guess this kind of turned into a review of Candyman 1992.
Quite good debate. Quite
And
good. Quite good
I
commentary.
guess a review and a statement on the remake of Candyman. So we'll post that. But yeah, the scariest thing about the movie is that if you watch it, if we play this game, I don't know why it became a game, but we play a game where we look at old movies from like the 90s and 80s, and we're like, how old are you? And so the therapist is
Dude.
38. And
know
if
that
you don't
when you
know,
watch the movie.
if you don't know what I'm talking about, he is the counselor therapist that, well, just watch it. He's 38. Anyways, happy Halloween, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Happy Halloween.